I was not meant to sit and moderate the next session, but Moanis Sinanovic, who was supposed to do that, unfortunately got ill and he couldn't join us today. In the session that follows, we will listen to two extraordinary thinkers and researchers and cultural workers, Anna Vujanović and Boris Buden, also dear friends and colleagues that left already big trace in not only in the field in which we operate, but in reflecting contemporary issues related to art and society. So we will start with Anna Vujanović, whose title of the lecture is Precarity or Self-Management as Enthymene. Anna is a cultural worker focused on bringing together critical theory and contemporary art. Since 2016, she is a team member and mentor at School for New Dance Development in Amsterdam. She published several book titles, and recently she co-edited the collection Live Gathering, Performance and Politics in Contemporary Europe, together with L.A. Piazza. Anna, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us somewhere from Greece. Anna is otherwise based in Berlin. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Janez. Thank you, everyone, for attending this session. Unfortunately, I was not able to come, but when I got the invitation. But yeah, okay, this is also a kind of new reality with the Zoom. So I will anyways try to keep my intervention short, like within 30 minutes, so that we also have an opportunity to hear Boris and then hopefully to have a good discussion afterwards of this Maska's event and the celebration and so on. I thought that on the one hand, I really agree with the conference's curators who said that contemporary self-employed precarious worker is close to the concept of an individual in the ideally conceived society of the Yugoslav version of socialism. From the second half of the 20th century, while on the other hand, I disagree with that, and I think that these two concepts are not close to each other at all. And then it was a kind of intuitive reaction, this kind of ambivalence or a double response to the conference title. And then I thought, okay, because there is something missing in the title when you put these things together, like precarity or self-management. And then I thought I would like actually to observe this title as an enthymene, and to check and to, in a way, examine this connection or disconnection between these two notions. When I started observing the title as an enthymene, I realized that actually it implies the context of a socialist society or an interest of cultural and other workers to build such a society through self-management. And Enthymene is anyways one of my favorite discursive figures and rhetoric figures. It's not very well known, but it's very effectively used.
We lost Anna. Do you hear us? We lost the connection.
Okay, here I am again. I have no idea what's happened, but okay. Zoom just disappeared totally at a certain point. But yeah, okay. So I don't know what was the last thing that you heard, but I will just go back a little bit because I wanted to explain why I'm interested in the Enthymene in general. It's because it's a rhetorical syllogism where we draw conclusions based on one premise, while there is always another premise that remains unsaid or implied or assumed. And in the history of philosophy, one of the famous examples is Descartes' statement or thought, I think, therefore I am. What he said is, I think, and the conclusion is, I think, therefore I am, while there is a kind of unsaid premise which says that in order to exist, one should think. Also, I found in the literature a very good example of Anton Gustav Matoš, who said that in Croatia, like u Hrvatskoj je naime kao na nebu, posljednji su na prvim mestima. In Croatia, it's like in heavens, the last are the first, where the unsaid premise is that in heavens, the last ones are the first, and then he made a very humorous and satirical, I think, comment about Croatia being heavens because of how the power is distributed in society. So that's interesting, and that's something which is interesting about Enthymene to me, especially when we think about self-management, because in general, if you think what is self-management and how can it be like an alternative to precariousness that we have today, I would just like to stress what you probably are all aware of, but just to remind us that self-management is just a set of methods by which individuals or groups effectively and efficiently can direct their own activities towards the achievement of certain goals. As such, it goes hand in hand with the neoliberal market economy, its tendency to lessen government involvement, and its ideology of individualism. And therefore, it is, of course, highly encouraged as an efficient and cheap performance mode of individual producers, starting from students' days. So it operates in art schools, university, professional sphere of art making and research, and so on. And a brief anecdote is that my grandmother, who was a communist and intellectual, and she traveled kind of, but not much in her life. And she always wondered how I traveled that much, where I go, who sent me, who gave me per diems, and so on. It was totally unimaginable for her that I just self-organized myself and that I was able to find grants or that I was able to find some connections and so on. For her, that was a totally new mode of operation in these terms. While when we speak about worker self-management, it's a specific organizational model of production where workers have decision-making power, and not only over themselves individually. So, for instance, how they will organize their working days and work hours, how they would design their desk, which co-working space, and they will choose, etc. But also over the process of production as a social practice. So in terms of organization, there are 2 points which are, for me, important when we speak about worker self-management. One is that worker self-management cancels the division between those who make decisions and those who execute them. And that's partly similar to what we have today with individual entrepreneurs. And on the other hand, there is a register which is dissimilar to today's form of self-management, referring to the division between those who produce and those who decide upon the production, especially the distribution of the produced value. I think that I don't need to explain that further, but that's a crucial difference between worker self-management as a socialist mode of organization of production that we had in former Yugoslavia, and which existed also in some other contexts, like in France, Algeria, Spain, and so on. But to continue with this discursive analysis, I would say that the language actually plays games with us here, and the self tricks us, as always. So the self in self-management is not a philosophical concept or something mysterious and deep. It's just a reflexive pronoun, but it's an interesting reflexive pronoun, and the reflexive pronouns are in general very interesting because in linguistics they're called indexicals. And indexical is the word whose meaning depends on the context in which it is used, such as I and here. So without the context, these words mean nothing because they have no reference. And then the questions that come from that angle of observation for me are, as an indexical, is the self immune to the error of misidentification of oneself as others or the other way around? Or does it really allow self-reference without identification? And there are some studies in analytical philosophy that try to say yes, to answer yes to these questions. But I think a study of ideology or political theory will certainly say no. Therefore, we can see here that self is equally applicable to I, an autonomous and possessive individual, and we workers in a socialist society. And then when thinking about these differences between how the self can be used and when we say self-management, it reminded me of my favorite episode of Sesame Street on Here and There. So I would like to share the screen and just show you a little bit of how this language plays games with us here. Okay. Okay. The host disabled attendee screen sharing. So please, the host, if you can allow me to share the screen, it would be great. Just 1 minute.
Can you try now?
Yes, now it works. Thank you. So.
Nema zvuka.
No, okay. Then I will try in just a moment once again.
Mikrofon. Ako imate mikrofon u Twitter.
Okay, I understand. I will try then again.
A jasno li mi najbolj zvuk? Kje pa? Probajmo.
Okay, let's try again.
Excuse me.
Do you hear now?
I was wondering if somebody could explain to me the difference
Ampak
here.
just from your
know
microphone.
what there means, and I was wondering if somebody could explain that difference to me. Do you think
Maybe
anybody can
just put it
explain
a
that
bit
difference?
more loud and we can do it, huh?
Nice if we help. For looking so spiffy. Practice, brother.
Excuse me, fellas. I was wondering if somebody could explain to me the difference between here and there, because I don't know what here means, and I don't know what there means, and I was wondering if somebody could explain that difference to me. Do you think anybody can explain that difference to me?
What do you think, Grover? I think it would be nice if we helped the little tyke. Okay.
Would you do that?
Mm-hmm. All right,
Help
I'll
to
tell
that
you
tyke?
what. You
What?
stay here and I'll go over there. Yeah.
What
You
is-
stay here with Grover.
What does that mean?
Well, what he means is that you and I are right here now, right here.
Oh,
Yeah, and Harry, my friend, is there. Hi, Harry. Hi, Grover.
well, I want to be there.
Oh, well, okay. You just walk right over to Harry. Go over there.
Oh, okay. Now I'm there, right?
No, now you're here. Grover is there. Hi, Grover.
No, but I wanted to be there.
Well, suit yourself.
Okay. Hi, Right, now I'm there, right?
No, you are here.
But I was here just a minute ago.
Okay, so that was about here in the, there and about how indexicals work. So for me, it was interesting to observe the self in this equation precarity or self-organization as an indexical that can mean here and there, or that can mean an individual or individual entrepreneur of today's neoliberal capitalist society, and we as workers in a socialist society. But to draw a bit a wider consequence of that, I would like to say that without a prospect of a socialist society as a process, social process driven by a desire to eradicate exploitation and create an egalitarian context of social justice, self-management actually doesn't overcome an individualist level of operation. And as such is not a socialist practice, it is far from that. It can only happen already highly individualized and competitive individuals, such as artists, to rise a shorter or for a longer or shorter or longer time above their competitors at the market of artistic labor. So speaking simply, the fact that some of you self-organized or self-manage yourself well doesn't help me with my precarity at all and doesn't serve others at all. Moreover, even my own self-management, if I do it well, doesn't change the social context and the social conditions. It just replicates the hierarchies and the mode of production that we have in capitalist society. It's the only difference is that it's now liberal, neoliberal, and so on. So therefore, for me, self-management without socialist social prospect and aspiration is not and cannot be a life vest against precarity. It cannot because well and successfully self-managed artists, as I said, only perpetuates and replicates the rules, principles, and ideals of a competitive and unjust society of neoliberal capitalism, even when they don't thematize or affirm these principles discursively. So it's part of their political unconscious. So for me, the dichotomy between precarity and self-management is a rhetorical syllogism, and as such, it's a false dichotomy. And we should be very careful here because it can also mean that what lies behind is either an overly enthusiastic belief that the socialism is just at hand, or a naivety about how to change the society around us. And since I've been part of different collectives in my life, and my work is cultural worker in Belgrade, we also did through a few projects like a kind of deeper research on the worker self-management and the kind of legacy of former Yugoslavia, and we try to extrapolate some of these principles in the field of education and research and art making. And one of these projects that I want to mention now was called the SOS project, or self-organized educational initiative in the arts in 2006 and 2007. And after that, we had a series of projects where we tried also to think about how some of these concepts could be used today or back then, but in a contemporary context, and how they would change not only what we learn, but also how we learn. And the main mission, let's say political mission, was that we, as those who go through the process of education, who study and learn, how can we take the education in our hands? And that was kind of the main mission of that. And it's also these projects, they were initiated in the times when the Bologna Declaration started having implications to the process of university education in Serbia, with paying for higher education or standardization, and trying to follow the European standards in higher education. So we tried somehow to intervene into these processes and examine different alternatives to the educational process, especially putting the trust on people educating themselves about how to educate themselves and what to learn. Used a lot of references at that time, but it's not maybe now that important to mention, to speak about that. But for me, that's a big lesson that I learned. Maybe the biggest one in my life, like an experiment like that, because then I learned how difficult it is to operate individually, which we necessarily do, while thinking about others involved in the process, and how what we do had an impact to the people around, and then how to create a kind of ecology that can bring together different needs, interests, and so on. And it has been like a long-term process and initiatives, and many of you there, at least those who I met on Zoom now, you were invited as a guest and collaborators of this project, so some of you already know them a little bit, but yeah, for me, as I said, it was a big lesson. And also then when I think about this title, it reminds me on that and on how difficult the process of reshuffling our thoughts and rewriting our imagination to achieve worker self-management in the society in which we live today is and are. So that was one thing that I wanted to mention. And the other thing is that I think it's important to understand. I will stop soon. I know that the time is running, but I wanted to say just in terms of like theory and methodology to remind us on what Gayatri Chakraborty-Spivak said about Marxism, that Marx believed, it was half humorous, but I think also interesting, that Marx believed that workers would exceed their personal interests once the real nature and true nature of the capitalist society is revealed to them. And Marxism managed to reveal that truth to a high extent, but still the question is how we can work on ourselves and how to change the way of understanding ourselves and way of thinking. That's why, yeah, I think I would be careful about that, especially because when we think about contemporary art making, we need to understand two processes, two general social processes, and I have written about them several times and lectured about them. One is the process of politicization of economy or production, and the other one is the process of economization of politics. And by that I mean what the first thesis comes from Hannah Arendt, who said that in modern capitalist society, starting with the French Revolution, politics becomes more and more interested in the distribution of goods or in economical and interests. She had a kind of Greek ideal of democracy in her mind. But nevertheless, her thesis is in certain way problematic, but on the other hand, it also today in neoliberal capitalist society, it says a lot about how politics function. But what she didn't answer at her time was, but what happens with the politics? One, it disappeared from the public sphere as a pure social activity or in this ideal sense. And then while doing research on that problem, I realized that actually an interesting answer comes from Italian post-operaist theorists who say that today's process of production is deeply soaked in politics and with political notions. Because what is produced today are not only objects like cars or performances or exhibitions and so on, but the ultimate product of today's production is subjectivity and mode of sociality and so on. In these terms, the way we work is highly political, although we cannot speak about politics as a pure activity in a classical sense. And because of that, I think when we speak about self-management, we need to be very precise, especially in how we operate and how we work and how we form collectives, how we enter collaborations, and so on and so on. Otherwise, as I said, it will just remain a solitary enterprise, and with that we cannot change the society in the way how we see ourselves as cultural workers and others who are our colleagues and co-workers in that field. So I think after we achieve and we manage to establish a new socialist society, a socialist society that comes from the future and not from the past, when we achieve it, then we should then come together and think again about precarity or self-organization as a kind of dichotomy and a kind of proposition that can bring maybe new way of working together to all of us. Okay, with this I would finish for now. I also mentioned this coming from socialism coming from future, referring to something that Boris Buden said a few years ago about fascism coming from future, where we always observe it as something coming from the past. So maybe after Boris' intervention, it could be also something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna. Stay with us for the Q&A session. And now we will give a word to Boris Buden, who will, the title of his talk is Vernacular Continuities. Boris Buden is a writer, cultural critic, and translator. He is a permanent fellow at the European Institute of Progressive Cultural Policies in Vienna. He teaches cultural theory at the Faculty of Art and Design at Bauhaus Universität in Weimar and at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. His latest book is Transition to Nowhere. Boris?
Yes, please, yes.
Okay, so the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. First, thank you for the invitation. I must say that this is an extraordinary occasion because am I right understanding that we are celebrating 100 years of Maska? Obviously it is a centenary.
Yes, it is 100.
Just for a moment, you can think of the world 100 years ago. Also in terms of art, like 1917, Duchamp exhibited his Fontaine. He did it several years after his famous, this painting, which was like a sort of cubist about Nous descendons l'escalier, which is nude, descending the staircase. But it was very interesting because it was for the first time that human movements were first observed through a technical object, which is through a technique, through a machine, and he used the movements he found in photography and put it on the painting. So this is the what we later would call reproducibility, technical reproducibility of art. And then you have the first at that time, the Fordism is already there. Assembly line, Ford in United States, but also something very important for today's world. You know who is Edward Bernais? Edward Bernais is a nephew of Sigmund Freud. At that time, around 70s, he develops the concept of public relation, of what is modern advertising, of course, relying on psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud. Then, this is also the first time that there is an idea of the end of art and this end, like Georg Gross and John Hertfield, saw in Tatlin's work in a technique, sort of end of art. And you know, this is this moment when the media and technological changes enter the experience of art. So I think this is something very important, and my major problem is, you know, how to relate to this past, how to think in dimensions, temporal dimensions of 100 years, long-term, you know, long-term temporalities, because I don't think that we are today capable of experiencing something as a long-term temporality. This is even more important when we, you know, think about a former Yugoslav past, which, okay, take the notion of self-management, and I'll try to compare it to the experience of precarization today. The question is, how do we relate to this past? Is this past given? I had a huge problem in my attempt to write a book on Želimir Žilnik. And this is something my experiences in writing this, traumatic experiences in writing this book, I will somehow present here. And in fact, I would like, and this is the idea of my talk, I would like to share this problem. I will try to explain what is the problem, what was the problem. So, as you know, Želimir Žilnik, a filmmaker, and his films are definitely something in the past. In the former Yugoslavia, socialism, self-management, Yugoslav cultural industries, etc. However, it is a historical object, which means like self-management. You know, there is the idea of self-management, and there is a historical self-management. Self-management which had its own history within what we call the past. So my problem was generally how to deal with the past, how to relate to the past. And recently there was this idea in Belgrade, you know, to restart or to start properly a new form of study called Yugoslav studies. And I wrote an essay about it. Again, I have a huge problem with the idea of reflecting the past, of finding the objects of the past. And speaking of self-management and precarity, you know, in my own case, this is not simply an object of the past. This is part of my individual memory, since I was a precarious, self-employed, at that time member of the ZUK, Zajednica umjetnika Hrvatske, on the market of former Yugoslavia's cultural market. This is one thing. Another thing is a political, that I had a very open and very traumatic conflict with the system. But what was the conflict about? It was about the commodification of education. You know, so I protested already 81 against what is at stake today as a part of our experiences. So in my desperate try to deal with Želimir Žilnik and his work, I realized that first what I have to do is to reflect upon what we might call conditions of possibility of our experience of the past. So my book was actually, I wrote it, my book was, actually the title was Uvod u prošlost, or if you like, past, an introduction, since I had first, you know, to do this job. And this is also my problem for today. And I would like to share this problem with you, and to see and to ask for help. I will try to explain what is the problem and try to to motivate you to understand the problem. Again, the past is not given, or it is given in a certain forms, which we might call, at that time, thinking of the like 60s or 70s or even 80s, the past was an object of historiography, for instance. And then there was a future at that time. We are talking from a different temporality about a different temporality. And the speed was also different. And what, I might say something about what Anna said about future, concept of the future. As we all know, this past had a future. This was a past of which future what was intrinsic, an intrinsic part. Is it possible today? Do we have future as an authentic experience of our contemporaneity? This is a huge question. And on the other side, the question of future was then and now easily to answer. At that time, in the former socialism, the future was seen as a growth, as a progress on all the levels of society, leading to some sort of post-class society, etc., etc. It was somehow there. It was present. It was, as I'm saying, intrinsic part of at that time present. Today, future is on the other side. I always say today this is the question about the future is the most easily to answer, because there is no future, as you know, today. I mean, it is interesting how the time in which we live and in which we talk, time in which we try to understand the past, has completely evacuated future as its problem, in its inability to think in long-term concepts. First, this is the fact that we are now speaking English is a very, very traumatic moment for all of us, because it has something to do with extinction of languages. As you know, the problem of extinction is not only about extinction of species. As you know, here in Germany, in the last few decades, 70% of insects are disappeared. 2/3 of wildlife has disappeared. We know all about it. But there is also, and it was last year, quite a huge topic, extinction of languages. Allegedly, there are 7,000 languages in the world, but almost half of them are in danger of extinction. Or take our small languages. The last research in the European Union says that they did a research on 30, like 200 experts did research on 30 European languages in terms of how they behave in the digital age. And they came to the conclusion that 21 of 30 European languages, not all were analyzed. But for instance, Slovenian and Croatian were analyzed, that they are not simply in danger of digital extinction, but that they will certainly not survive digital age. So the fact that we are talking English is this is the moment of the extinction of languages. We are now, by thinking, theorizing in another language, which is English. I'm not going deeply into this. We are simply facilitating this extinction. Very soon, our languages won't be able to, won't provide a medium for theorizing at all. They will be completely out, completely revernacularized. And the problem is, and the next problem is, Our nations have no future. I mean, this is now, again, not a long-term prospect. It is something very, very clear. As you know, a few weeks ago, the research on fertility rates in the whole world, globally, was published. And just to put it short, for our nations, like since the fertility rate is 1.4, 1.5, like in Croatia, in Serbia is worse, Slovenia is a little bit better. But look, until the end of the century, Serbia and Croatia will have less, the population, less people than Slovenia today. There will be around 1.5 million. More than 60% of them will be older than 65. Even in the 20 years in Croatia, half of the population will be older than 65, which means that the story of the nation, of the biological, nation, it is over. So we are talking today in a different language, from the different cultural background of this language into the past, trying to understand. But the question is, what can be saved from the past? And I'm now, since my topic is translation, what can be translated? Translation is, as Walter Benjamin would say, a Fortleben des Originals, a continuation of life of an original, an afterlife, as they sometimes translate. So, is there any afterlife of what once used to be self-management? And I will now, instead of theorizing so much, instead of directly taking the concepts in their historical context, because I don't think that the notion of historical experience makes sense today. Historical experience presupposes certain automatic translation, something you have, some direct understanding, but I don't think this is possible. As you know, the so-called post-historical term implies also the move from history to memory. So we are talking about cultures of memory. If the past today is, if we ask about the mode of existence of the past, that this mode is cultural. Past exists in the form of a different culture. So the experience of a temporal difference is at the same time, we can perceive it only if it is articulated through a cultural differences. And this means that we are in a situation of, a certain cultural translation. So I will talk about the past, trying to motivate you again for some sort of cultural translation. And I will be not so much using concepts. I have some video material, some, moments of sensual memory, so to say, so as to articulate the problem. And I will show you several videos. I wrote about it in the book on Želimir Žilnik, but I would like really to show you the videos. So I'm now sharing the screen. We will start to think about the past from the present perspective, the perspective of neoliberal capitalism, perspective of precarious workers, but I will focus on a certain figure, which I would call musical amateur, amateur in music. Because I think this is a very nice figure. I will later, if I will have enough time, explain why I'm using the notion of amateur. This is, Bernard Stiegler, who died, who killed himself few weeks last month. He developed the concept, the figure of the amateur as being some sort of remedy for the future, in which this tension between economic production and what we call precarious worker, this tension might be somehow sublated or reconciled. This is a huge topic. We don't have so much time, but let me show you. As you know, today's neoliberal capitalism is based on the idea of the market and competition of the market. So precarious workers are where we meet them on the market in their struggle, which has the form of market competition. So I'm now going to share, just like, sorry, to share a video screen. Yes, okay. Is it okay? Do you see? Well, yes. Okay.
Hi, what's your name, darling?
My name is Susan Boyle.
Okay, Susan, where are you from?
I am from Blackburn near Bathgate, West Lothian.
It's a big town.
It's a sort of collection of villages. I had to think there.
And how old are you, Susan?
I am 47. And that's just one side of me.
Okay, what's the dream?
I'm trying to be a professional singer.
And why hasn't it worked out so far, Susan?
I've never been given the chance before, but here's hoping it will change.
Okay, and who would you like to be as successful as?
Elaine Page.
Elaine
Like
Page.
What are you going to sing tonight?
I'm going to sing I Dreamed a Dream from the Miserables.
Okay, big song.
Yeah?
Oh, yes.
You didn't expect that, did you? Did you? No.
Yes, we don't have time. I would like to show you the whole, this is the story about success. She is, as you know, a person without any chance, unemployed, 47, amateur. And of course, there is a still chance in today's capitalism for these people. But not only that, we are talking about the end of industrial capitalism and the begin of this neoliberal global capitalism. And this implies also, on the one side, disappearing of classical industrial for this mode of production and expansion of cultural industries. So I'm now switching to a film, Mark Herman's Breast Off from 96. Probably you saw the film. This is a story about miners. This is this Great Britain, 84, Margaret Thatcher crashes the unions, you know, the Battle of Orgrave. Jeremy Deller later made this reenactment. And this is the story about what happens with these miners after they have lost their jobs. Of course, they form a brass band, and they, you know, they move from industrial workers to cultural producers, amateur cultural producers. And then there is again a competition, and at the end of the film, they won the competition. They come to the Royal Albert Hall in London, and there is this you know, they presentation, again, something similar to Susan Boyle, William Tell, Ouverture, Rossini's, you just like, sorry?
You can see the video. Maybe you should close the other one.
Oh, yes, sorry. Sorry. Yes. And then I share again.
Try again.
Yes. I'm not just like see. Yes.
Okay. Yes, it's okay. Don't think it's late.
Sorry. Yeah, that's off. This is the last. So you see, I mean, again, I have to cut it because I don't have so much time. Anyway, they succeeded in again winning the competition, and at the end, you know, they were supposed, the guy was Danny was supposed to get you know, to give a speech to thank, and he uses it just like, again, I will share it to you. Breast of, well, I'm not just like instead of showing this, because I don't have so much time, just, you know, he comes and confronts the audience, and instead of being thankful for the success, he uses this for a political talk, for a political speech. He says, I'm quoting, "Government has systematically destroyed an entire industry, our industry, and not just our industry, our communities, our homes, our lives, all in the name of progress, and for a few lousy bob." This is what he's, you know, so he uses culture as a sort of new form of political protest, as a cultural worker, as a cultural producer. And this is how Western emancipatory thinking looks into the past, understands, reflects upon this move from industrial society to the cultural industry as a chance, as an opportunity, as a possibility, you know, to influence politics. And then I quote from Charity Scribner from Requiem for Communism. You know, it's about nostalgia for collective. As factories and plants are shut down, the site of culture becomes an important meeting ground for collective. The end of industrial revolution reveals truths that the left has yet to fully acknowledge. Culture's potential for social change exceeds that one of workspace. But now I am coming finally back to former Yugoslavia. I'm to the 60s, to Živojin Pavlović, kad budem mrtav i beo, when I will be dead and pale, and just speaking of precarity, speaking of chances in a cultural industry, as it is, as the Western emancipatory theory expects of us, to see our political chances for emancipation in the space of culture after this cultural turn. So let's, I would say in many things and contemporary experiences, we have some sort of déjà vu, Yugoslav déjà vu. I would even say if you look today into what is the European crisis of European Union, we might recognize something, as I'm saying, Yugoslavization of Europe. But so let me give a response on this promise of culture, emancipatory promise of culture, which comes with English language, and the theory comes to us using Kad budem mrtav I beo, the very beginning. You will immediately recognize. So yes.
Puno stegobe! Da ne vidiš da se nisu svi popeli! Ja sam i čekao, ali neće! Šta, opet ista pesma? Kuda ćemo, Milutine, i sam znaš? Posao je završen, dobili ste pare, nađi se. Ali, nema tu ali. Idi u fabriku, u Varoš. Pa nisam ja ovdje ničija zadružna baba. Bubreg? Evo ti bubreg, mat. Odi ovamo. Šta? Šta da radi? Beži budalo bilo kuda, inače si nadrljao. Gde ću bre bubreg? Na drvo pa da cvrkućem. Ma samo što dalje odavde. Pogledaj mene. Školovali me za ekonoma, a sad šta radi? Polivam upravniku da se umiva. Kidam burazeru, prvom prilikom kidam.
Milutine!
Again, it would be beautiful to show it to you, but just, these are first 3 minutes of the film. And you have what? You have unemployed people like Susan Boyle, who work for a socialist enterprise on like wage workers on daily basis. As you see, they are, wage workers, completely precarious. And there is this bubreg, kidney, who is, educated and cannot find a job. Let me now, it would be fantastic to see, to accompany Jimmy Barka through the world of the 60s of former Yugoslavia, which is cultural work, which is a cultural world of the emerging cultural industry. But let me close it very, very quickly, and I have not so much time. It is just like, yes. Do you see? I think you see. At the end, they come to Belgrade, after he tried to make a career singing around, and they come to Belgrade.
Ove uslove nisu
Ma, biće sve u redu, Matevice, molim vas, ma biće. O, Jimmy Burazeru, otkud ti? Eto, tražim neku šljaku. Upoznajte se.
Bojana.
Bilo mi je Vrš Lišković. Jeli, pa šta radiš, Burazeru, a? Pevam. Oho, a repertoar? Maramica, svilenica, suljaga i tako to. Znači narodnjaci. Nego pročitao sam onaj oglas u novinama, pa ako bi ti mogao da mi nešto... Da, Burazeru, samo jest da sam ja najbolji menadžer na Balkanu, ali sada prolaze treskavci. Šta da radim sa tom? Ma ne, kapiram ja i to sve znam. Kapiraš, a znaš kakva je konkurencija? Slušaj, Bubrik, ako mi sada pomogneš, sve će biti u redu. Okej, ali pazi, ali ako propadneš, onda si gruba. Važi. Ajme.
So you see, this is a Susan Boyle situation. This is a situation of the miners in Brest off. And there is a competition. They have, like Jimmy Barca is already a cultural worker, producer, and there is now competition. Sorry, may I give you like, these are the beautiful pictures, and then I will close with these pictures. Again, I must just like speed it up. These are documentary footages of the real competition, so-called Gitariada in Belgrade, and you just like.
Sada slušajte novog pevača Janka Bugarskog iz Svilajnca. Janko Bugarski, zvani Jimmy Barka.
Pred svaki izlazak u grad, ja se pitam, da li ću naći u tom gradu devojku glavu, devojku glavu, koja bi mogla mene da voli, devojka glavu.
So you see that there is no promise of success. Just to say, you know, yes.
You should bring it to the end.
Yes, I'm actually, I wanted to I had the idea, I understood that I have 40 minutes. Anyway, I wanted to show it to you. So my question is how to navigate, you know, how to deal with the problem of these different temporalities, our relation to the past. In the former Yugoslavia, this, you know, if you would analyze a cultural industry, and you know, 90% of workers in the cultural industry were precarious workers on the market, working on the level of individual contracts with the enterprises. Enterprises were big companies. So this reflects it. Anyway, I'm now closing it by hoping that I have motivated you to think differently about these temporalities and allow for a possibility that what we are now experiencing has already been, in terms of its future today, has been articulated like 60, 70 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. Anna, are you with us?
Yes.
Okay. We have a little bit of time for questions. So if there is already something from the audience, please. So, Katja.
Puno hvala za sjajna izlaganja. Puno pozdrava u Berlin. Katja Kobold postavlja pitanje. So we need to have it in English, yes? Yes.
Maybe you can come closer. They can see you better.
Okay, you see me? Yes. In your talks, as far as I could understand, your picturing of this different temporality and, so to say, the structure of this different temporality of the past, the self-management, is quite antagonistic. From what I could grasp. Nevertheless, and this is also maybe also obsolete question, this is also a question about closing the narrative about it. Yesterday, we listened to Branislav Jakovljević talk on the position of free artists or independent artists within the self-management system. And as we were also within the symposium talking about this self-immolation moment, so to say, canceling from the inside in terms. I would like to ask you what is your, so to say, vision of this decay. Because yesterday Branislav Jakovljević really kind of his position was that it was, so to say, systematically destroyed and made impossible the self-management system. I wasn't sure whether from the inside. I had more of the feeling that it's more within the global, so to say, arena. But what is your position on this immolation or self-immolation?
Well, I must say that I probably understood a third of a fourth of your question. And then you asked me about my relation to, is it yet to the problem of self-management, or I don't know, but let me say very, very shortly what was generally my problem. It is why I have been using the pictures of musician amateurs, because Bernard Stiegler uses the notion of or the figure of amateur as a figure that could reconcile the division between immaterial work and technique, technology, etc. In emancipatory terms, in terms of a new economy of contribution which is sort of a critique of the economy of consumption. And the figure of amateur is opposite to the figure of consumer, while amateur is able to create some sort of a critical public, while consumers have only audience, which are commodities, as you know, audiences we can buy and sell today. So the point is to find a figure in which there would be possible to translate the experience of the past, which must have this idea of or ability of critique, of creating a critical public, to translate it into the present and to make some sort of a futural perspective of it. In these terms, and this is especially important when you think about figures of Želimir Žilnik, his film work, and his actors, his heroes of his films, all sort of marginalized. How to think of these amateurs, all of the amateurs, how to think of them and give them some sort of future. What is very interesting and should be discussed now, that we are back to the notions of praxis and to the notions of alienation, both so present in Stigler's philosophy, and this can reconnect us to the former, praxis philosophy. These are two topics that have been completely removed from our thinking in the last 40 years, but they might come back. So, just like to put it, this Jimmy Barca, in difference to the Brestov, is as he is presented as a hero of the film, Pavlovich film, is capable of creating some sort of critical public, while Susan Boyle and the heroes of the Brest-Off, they get audiences. This is the difference, which I try, I have tried to reflect on.
Anna, would you like to respond to the question?
Yeah, in a way, yes. I also didn't hear the question very well. It's like some technical problems, but I'm also inspired with the Boris lecture, and maybe I'm very enthusiastic about the prospect of worker self-management. But as I said, it's something that will come from the future, and in order to achieve that future, I think we need to work on it and to build it, because I totally agree, it won't come by itself, and maybe now we need to catch up with the future of a socialist society, which never happened. But that's maybe a prospect that I see. On the other hand, I think maybe it's also good to think about the scope of precarity that we have today in comparison with the previous decades, when we had the socialist countries and when we had the welfare states. I think that what Isabel Laura, a German theorist, has written about that is useful, because she noticed that today we have a situation of normalization of precarization. And then we need to think about certain numbers to see, for instance, in our field, performing arts, or in some other fields, for instance, when it comes to the contract or assemblies, or when it comes to like individual engagement of cultural workers and so on, to compare the situations and then to see what the figures can say. Because recently I also, and also, of course, we need to understand that Živojin Pavlović was a black wave theater maker, and he wanted to say that even in a socialist society, we have this precarity and we have all these problems. And I think that their point was very important. But today we speak about just the normality of neoliberal capitalist society. And recently, just as an illustration, when it comes to Susan Boyle and the phenomenon, like Susan Boyle, is that we have also in the domain of amateur entrepreneurship, we have these multi-level marketing companies worldwide. And for instance, in the US, they're extremely well-developed and big. And recently I saw a documentary about multi-level marketing companies in essential oils. And the percentage of people earning, for instance, 89 of people involved in the young dimension, I think the biggest company, 89% of people earning $4 per year through that system, this pyramid, while 0,015% achieving the status of diamond managers, which finally makes you kind of a higher middle class and a kind of decent life and so on. So I think that's also an illustration of what Isabel Ora tries to stress, that today precarity is not on the margins. It's not about these marginal guys. It's not about outsiders of our society, but it's about predominant way of working and not only working professionally, but also operating in the society. But now we speak about work. So I think maybe that's a difference, and that's something we should think about.
Do we have another question? I also have just a simple question for both of you. Okay. Do you understand me? Okay.
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I would actually have a question for both of you. Why is it so difficult to find some kind of rights representation mode that would associate self-employed? So why don't we have, for example, unions for self-employed people? For example, in Slovenia there are 110,000, which is a huge number. Only minor percentage of this is in culture, our cultural self-employed people. So, so why is it so difficult to associate self-employed people and represent their rights? And what do you see as a mode, as a potential effective mode that would work, let's say, in a similar way as association of workers that are employed by companies in unions?
Boris, do you want to?
Okay, Anna, go ahead.
No. I think that in Berlin, it's true, we don't have unions, but also the independent or free scene in performing arts, it functions to an extent through a kind of self-understanding of how to work, how to operate, what is useful when you think about wider perspective, what not. And there is also like a series of roundtables with the representatives of the scene and for instance, in negotiation with the local governments and so on. So it's not that it totally doesn't exist, it exists, but it exists mostly the free scene, which is anyways politically oriented towards the left. And then we also have many of the artists involved in Die Linke, especially the international division of Die Linke, which I think helps. And maybe in a wider sense, I can say, yeah, we don't have these unions because contemporary workers are also made believe that they are free autonomous individuals and that other workers are just their competitors. So there is no aspiration toward the union. It's in a way the opposite. And maybe also this general idea of the society as like a common fate of all of us is disappearing together with the neoliberal capitalism. But I think, yeah, this kind of individualism, which is selfishness and competitiveness, that's maybe the main reason for when we think about wider social sphere, in my view, of course.
For me, I show you that the poor Jimmy Barca has no union, has no political level to articulate problem and to get some political support. This was the major problem of the Yugoslav self-management. While it succeeded in give certain price on the level of enterprises to the workers, on the level of political organization of a class, it has actually destroyed solidarity. So there was not this level, and there is no this level today either, especially now when the context might be understood in terms of its post-social character, in which you have a global competition, you have concepts of financialization, which was also the similar problem to former Yugoslavia. So we come to the crucial question. This is a political organization, and such a political organization can be articulated only if it can at the same time articulate some sort of vision of new society or something, some sort of common life that would replace what used to be society, within a nation state, with having its language, its culture, its identity, etc., etc., etc. And it might be, well, interesting, but just to say it very simply, it is political question. As a political question, there are no theoretical answers to such political question.
Thank you. We are basically supposed to end the session, but if there is some last question, Tomislav?
Yeah. Hey, Boris. Hey, Anna. I apologize first. I wasn't in the session. I was in an interview, so I arrived only for the Q&A. But
I must say, I can hardly understand anything.
Okay, but that might be breaking up the link, or should I? Oh. Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Probably.
Zdravo.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I apologize first for not being in the session. I was in an interview, so I only arrived for the last question. This is my thought. I think that there are many scholars demonstrating that precarity at the level of atypical labor contracts is not the predominant fact in European economies. These economies have largely transformed in the way that there are no longer mass companies as they used to exist during more industrial sort of period, and there is much more migration, so migrant workers are much more precarized and all that. But in general numbers, precarity is probably more prevalent there where there are service economies, particularly in the south of Europe. Like Croatia has the biggest percentage of precarious workers. Well, it's easy to explain, it's tourism, no? Seasonal workers. But what I'm thinking is not so much like whether there is precarity or not, but whether we should advocate for right not to work. And this has to do with the centrality of labor market to the social integration of individuals in present-day societies. I think in socialism that was also the case. No, you kind of have social recognition and material independence once you are able to go into the labor market and become in that way autonomous. And obviously, the recognition, there is a hierarchy there as well. No, there are invisible jobs, there are professions that have sort of high esteem, particularly technocratic. But I think that we should go past the idea that the sphere of labor should be the primary form of social integration in contemporary societies. I know that Yanis Varoufakis has this crazy idea that we should abolish labor market, that everybody should get sort of shares in contemporary economy, so kind of form of cooperativism he envisions there. But I think there is something there. I'm not sure about his idea, how that will be implemented, haven't looked into it. But just coming from the perspective of a person with disability, people with disability are often forced into that box, like, you need to find a job. That's when you become really an autonomous person. You're no longer dependent. But for most of those people, it's impossible to compete in the labor market. No employer will do the adaptations necessary at the sort of place of work to fit. Even if you can cognitively master the task, physically you still have needs which are not adequate to the organization of cognitive labor in offices. So many people from the disability movement articulating that demand, like right not to work. That should be kind of central demand to contemporary societies, and we should find a different form of recognition and material subsistence redistribution that doesn't hinge so centrally on centrality of integration. Doesn't hinge on centrality of integration through the labor market. I mean, UBI is obviously one type of way to address that. There is still labor market in that, but I think there is something in just saying that labor in this form is a problem.
Yeah, thanks. It's always terrible to have this a role of somebody controlling time. But Anna, you said that you have to go.
I have 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Would you like to comment or?
Yeah, I can say something briefly. I think it's an interesting proposal, of course, that Tom brought about, and of course, it would be a very like a long process and with a lot of obstacles and so on if we would go into that direction, because also the right not to work is not a totally new concept, and in the history we had like at least when speaking about Europe, maybe even wider, but let's say speaking about Europe, we had various social configurations and social orders where certain classes of people had the privilege not to work and had the privilege to have a right not to work. So we also know that there are these obstacles, but of course, if in today's society we want to go into that direction, we need to deal and do better and see how to achieve that right, and then how to distribute, how to satisfy the basic needs in this metabolism with the nature that we have, like from baking bread to washing dishes and cleaning toilets. But in general, it's an interesting proposal for me. But at the end, I think we would still come, we would again come to the problem of self-management as a communal practice in society or not. So I think when I speak about worker self-management, I of course refer to the Yugoslav organizational model in production, but I also think about how we operate in society. I even think more about association in society than specifically in the domain of work and production. So it doesn't, for me, eliminate the problem or the provocation that you put in the title. That would be just in brief how I find how I would think about Tom's thoughts and proposition.
Thanks, Boris. Would you like to
Yes,
have a final
also,
word?
Very briefly, I think the question is very, very old, and there is certain connection between what we call Yugoslav self-management and this problem or question you have raised here. And this is via André Gortz and his differentiation of work and employment. And with the idea, I mean, his, you know, classical, this critique of differentiation of the time of leisure, time of work. And I said that the figure of amateur probably offers some sort of perspective. Bernard Stiegler's concept. And I will just like give you one point, one quote. This is, you know, the amateur resists double dissociation. Dissociation of the worker from his or her work site, which is typical for industrial form of labor, and dissociation of the consumer from his or her site of leisure in a, you know, organization of spectacle, industry of spectacle. And Claire, I quote, the amateur resists this double dissociation and does so because of the time of the amateur, which resists the dissociation of the time of life time of work, of production, and time of leisure. We are talking here about this, the problem of a certain knowledge, which is savoir-faire and savoir-vivre, knowledge on how to live and knowledge of how things are made and produced, which has been lost from the today's proletarians, and I'm just like cutting it short. The figure of amateur, and this figure presupposes reconceptualization of what we think as a society. Society is not something already given. So this might be something, you know, just to give you a hint for a further reading.
Okay, thank you so much to both of you, Anna and Boris. Enjoy your time and hopefully we meet soon in person. Thank you also for your attention. Today, as we know, is a special day. World looks a little bit different since 11th of September 19 years ago. But today is also a special day because it's the birthday of Tom. So let's go to have some food and toast for his Tommy's. I am not going to say which birthday. Thank you so much, and